Hey guys, welcome to the Bounty Beast course. This is a new introduction which should be seen as a guideline through the content. The course did evolve a lot since we released the course in May 2018. We did add a lot of videos, we did add ranges, we did add a totally new concept on how to deal with the bounty, and now is the time to answer in general a lot of questions which I got throughout this half year in Discord channel or in studying groups or in personal messages. So I want to give some answers there to questions which will occur more often. And also, after this video, you should be able to work through the content, which is, I know, a lot, and some things are very mathematical, how you should work this content through. I also give already some additional information throughout the video, so even if you have worked through the course, I think it's worth watching this video. Some more new thoughts and some more example hands. And this whole introduction or presentation is structured in 4 points. The fourth point is how I personally would go through the content, and the first 3 points are dealing with mindset and the deal with the bounty in MTT poker in general. So let's start right off with the mindset. And when I say you need the right mindset, then you should actually accept that you have to put a lot of work when you want to be very good in PKOs. So in the Discord channel, I usually use the analogy if I would introduce ICM today. So imagine there is no ICM concept at the moment in a poker world, and I'm coming out and say, okay, I was in the lab and I have worked out an independent chip model for tournament poker, and all of a sudden you have to fold aces at the bubble of a satellite. Meanwhile, you before just play the ranges which you would play in cash game, for example. And this, of course, has a very, very big influence on your ranges if you are taking the ICM effects into account, if you are taking future effects into account. So your ranges are changing totally if you're comparing the MTT poker play to cash game play. And this is some kind of intuitive. Of course, the tournament is somehow different to cash game. And for PKO, it's also kind of intuitive because the bounty has some effect as well. And when you work through the course, you will see that this has more or less a negative risk premium effect. By the way, if you are not familiar with the wording like ICM or risk premium, there are theory videos about ICM and bubble factor, for example, and PKO and ICM inside of this course. So if you're still missing a little bit of the basics when it comes to poker wording and the concepts behind tournament poker, there are some videos as well. So from the correct mindset, you should accept that you will have to do a lot of work if you want to be very good in PKOs or have a very big edge in PKOs. So you should be open-minded to range changes in your opening range, in your free betting range, in your off-calling ranges of rejams. All of those changes can be very drastic. On the final table, I had an example where you can just open 65% out of MP. Meanwhile, you could only open like 30% in a non-KO case on the same final table with the same payout structure. So the changes on the ranges are in very many spots, very big. The off-calling ranges are, for example, way wider. The importance of winning a side pot in a multi-way all-in scenario is also way more important than in a non-KO case. There are a lot of things which you have to regard. And of course, this is a lot of work. And when you're working, you will have to deviate from already learned, for example, opening ranges or rejamming ranges. So if you have the TMC, you have very solid opening ranges, you have very solid rejamming ranges, you know how to play in 3-bet pots, what to 3-bet. In PKOs, there are cases where you can just 3-bet 50% against the 18 big blind open raise from MP. It's just possible. Meanwhile, in the non-KO ranges, which the TMC provide, well, there is no additional benefit of 3-bet calling But in PKOs, very dependent of the KO of the player, there can be a very huge benefit of 3-bet calling, and so you want to increase your 3-betting range, especially if players behind you are not 4-betting light. So from the mindset perspective, be very open-minded that you will have to change a lot of things when you're playing PKOs compared to your usual gameplay and non-KOs. But of course, all the knowledge which you have already accumulated, just playing poker, playing GTO, rejamming, like a good range in non-KOs, this will help you. This is a very good basement. So this is not wasted time which you have already put in the non-KO tournament. Of course, you use all the tournament poker play, but for PKOs, there will be a lot of situations where you have to deviate. And I can tell you, when you are there, so at the point where you have very good understanding of how much the bounty influences your range, how much the equity drop is, what does this mean in combos against a certain range, you will feel very, very good. You will crush the fields, you will make a lot of money, you will exploit the people very, very well. You will just feel like Superman in the PKOs. So the first point, the right mindset, should be an answer to several different questions and several different comments which were right about like what this is a lot of work to. Yes, it is. Um, it is a bit more mathematical than non-KO tournament poker. I would actually disagree. It's not like more mathematical. It's just like getting used to it. So ICM by itself is also very, very mathematical. But at the final table or at the final two tables, you're not calculating like the placement probabilities in your head and out of this stack dollar values. You just did a lot of simulations to get to the point where you pretty well understand how ICM influences your ranges, or you have always seen that pocket eights are, for example, on a final table, usually not a good raise call against like any stack size if you're a mid stack. So this is like very consistent, and this you are taking out of your studying, and then you apply this to your game. So this is not a very mathematical task. And for PCAS, it's also the same. Like at the very start, it feels like, well, there's a lot of mathematics and how should I apply this in game? But when you're getting used to this, either by the very good approximation, so you have a very fast, very good in-game decision, or just by studying, so doing a lot of HRC work or doing a lot of ICMizer work, working with our online calculation tool, you will get a better and better understanding of which combinations against which bounty are like always close, always good, always bad. You will get used to this. I wanted to offer different ways in this course on how you get to the goal, so how you're getting good to bounties. And one way, of course, is just understanding the mathematics and the logic behind bounty poker. But I also give you like ways how to simulate, how to approximate very fast the value of a bounty in game. And because everyone is different, you will have different ways on how to deal with the bounty. So now let's come to the second point, and we have now different approaches on how to deal with the bounty. And I'm often asked, so which one should I take? Which one should I learn? Which one is the best? Which one is the fastest? And the goal is always to make as quick and as accurate as possible approximations in-game, as well as having a good study basement when you're reviewing hands. So when you're in-game and you have like 20 seconds time to evaluate on how much the bounty should be worth in chips, in equity drop, in effective stack size, in whatever you like to calculate, so whatever you concept you like to take, you want to make this as quick and as accurate as possible so you don't make mistakes and you gain a lot of money. Of course, this is the goal. And also, if you are reviewing hands, you want probably not always open HRC to calculate every single spot. If you have a good approximation on how much the bounty is worth in your review, then of course you are saving a lot of time learning and recapitulating on which spot is approached which way. So let us sum up which different approaches we already have. We could take the, I call it changing odds method, which is nothing else than we are taking the bounty and recalculate this in a chip value. Then we're adding the chips to the pot, and then we are getting new odds. So we are getting a different equity compared to the case where no bounty would be involved. And according to this equity, we choose if our combination is good enough against the opponent's, for example, open jamming range. The next approach which you could take is that you could use bubble factors to get the equity drop caused by the bounty. So if you're not familiar with bubble factors, this concept is explained in the ICM video, but just in short, you're comparing the cases. How much does it cost when you're losing the hand to the case? How much are you winning when you're winning the hand? And you're dividing those two dollar values by each other, and then you're getting a value. And out of this value, you can calculate an equity, and this equity you are comparing to the case where there would be no bounty involved. And you could also do this if you had a very good knowledge about ball factors and stack dollar values, but this is a very hard approach. I just noted here that you could actually be able to do this. We could also do just a lot of simulations. So we can take like 50 standard spots and just simulate them through for different bounty values. We print all the ranges out and we learn them if we are a visual kind of person. And then we have a very good idea for a lot of situations on which combinations are always good and which are close and which are always bad. We could do this as well. And this would be like the very optimal way, of course, if we could keep everything of this in our head, because we would use EV calculations there. EV calculations are always comparisons of actions. So we are comparing, for example, if someone open jams the action, we call the open jam against the action we are folding. And then we are calculating the win percentage, tie percentage, the lose percentage of the hand. And we get a dollar value out of the whole action calling the pre-flop all in. And we compare this whole action calling pre-flop all in to the action folding pre-flop all in. But you can already see this is nothing which you can do in-game. So if you face a new spot or a slightly different spot, and a slightly different spot in PKOs can mean already like 10% more or less range which you have to call or free bet. So a slight difference can have a very big impact on your ranges. And this is of course good to recapitulate what you should have already learned or on your way of learning when you're doing a bunch of sims. But for the in-game approximation, I think this is for most of the players also not a very good way. Then we could use the bounty power concept, and for this concept, because it is introduced in this course, I will do the third point, which will only deal with the bounty power concept. The beauty of the bounty power concept, it has a lot of upsides compared to the changing odds method. It is applicable in-game without very complicated calculations, and it is way more accurate than the changing odds method. And additionally, it also applies to ICM spots, probably not to spots where you have insanely high ICM. Let's say you're second chip leader against a chip leader on a final table. On a final table, the approximation might differ a bit. All right, you got this. But for most of the other spots, so let it be final two tables or less, the bounty power concept is actually pretty good and matches the calling ranges pretty well. So if you're putting in the time to understand how the concept works and then just use the numbers which we are providing to you, then you will do nearly pinpoint decisions in game. We could also use an effective stack size to compare ranges. So this is one of two parts which we are providing in the raise your edge stat. You have the effective stack size and you have the equity drops. So the equity drops are just the equity which you take away from the odds which you are getting in game. And the effective stack size gives you the actual stack minus the influence of the bounty and gives you a new stack size. For example, a 20 big blind stack is open jamming and he has a start bounty on his head and you're very early in the tournament, then you're only facing a 10 BB jam effective. The additional 10 BB are provided by his bounty, so you need less chips to call off his all in. So what you can see, you have a lot of different methods on how you could deal with the bounty. I already said I have one preferred way how to deal with the bounty, which is, I think, very simple and very accurate. But you could use all the concept to get like at least close to the same result. So there are a bunch of different concepts, but don't get distracted. In the end, you're choosing one concept which you want to apply in game, and then you can just stick to this. Or you're getting better and better, and then you decide that one concept is fitting way better than the other which you used before. I'm just providing a lot of different methods how you want to deal with the bounty in game, and you choose the method which is the quickest and for your accuracy which you want to have, the best you want to choose. And now I want to give you two little examples on how you would apply the concepts in game and how the difference in accuracy and in the end the difference in edge looks like. So I cannot really remember what kind of PKO tournament this was. I have noted that this player which jams from the button his 6 big blinds has 1 start bounty, and you can already see in a non-KO case you wouldn't even think about the spot, it's just an easy fold. But in a KO case this might be totally different. And now we can do calculations, and I will compare the changing odds method to the bounty power concept. So let us just first take the changing odds method. When you have done all the theory, you will find out that the bounty is worth round about 1,600 chips. And when you're adding those 1,600 chips additionally to the pot, then you have 3,700 roundabout in the middle, and you will have to call or rejam an additional 1,200. So you're getting roundabout 3 to 1 or a bit over 3 to 1. And a bit over 3 to 1 or 3 to 1 means you need 25% equity of every combination against his jamming range. This will end up in an any2 rejam spot. You can say, okay, we have one player behind us. This might change things. We will look at this in a very short matter of time. Let us take the second approach, which is the bounty power. And in this case, we are risking round about 1/4 of a starting stack. So a starting stack in this tournament was 5,000, and 1/4 of a starting stack would be 1,250. He has a little bit more. Yeah, it's round about 1/4 of a starting stack, and we can win 1 start bounty. We are getting then a bounty power of in between 3.7 to 4. And then I just look inside of my tableau and I see, okay, this means an equity drop of around about 14%. And this leads, since I need 37% equity in the case that this wouldn't be a bounty, to an equity with the additional equity drop of 14% to a needed equity of 23%. So again, we end up in the any2 rejamming range. Now let us look at the HRC results. What you can see here is that the button, so the Jack Monoloye guy, is open jamming, in this case 12%. And I did compare two cases. The first case is that the big blind is always folding. This is of course not very realistic, but just for the sake of simplicity, he is folding 100% of the times. And you can see in this case, we are rejamming 99.1% of our range. If we now let him call his 16%, so his deuces plus, ace 2 suited plus, ace 9 offsuit plus, king 10 suited, king queen offsuit, queen jack suited, then we are still jamming 98.2%. Yeah, I didn't fix the open jamming range, but you can believe me, it doesn't matter. So if he's jamming here 10% or 50% or 70%, it just doesn't matter. You have always a nearly any2 spot, and in this case we have a3 offsuit. So a3 offsuit is here a profitable rejam, and in game I did decide to rejam here, and you can see 8 high wins the hand. What you can also take away from this hand is that players will make a lot of mistakes. 7 deuce suited is never an open jam here. Why not? In PKOs or in KOs in general, high card value is very important. Connectivity of suited hands is very important if you're shorter. But if you're a bit deeper, let's say you had like 13, 14 big blinds, connectivity of suited connectors is also not very important. Very important is high card value, because you are getting called by a very, very wide range, and you will win a lot of those all-in situations just by high card and one pair. And I not only see this like in low stakes, this kind of play, but also in mid stakes and high stakes. People are just jamming the wrong ranges, overestimate the value of connectivity and suits, and totally underestimate the value of high cards and PKOs. So you can see in this case, our not so great 8 high is just winning this pot. Okay, now we can see both methods here are leading to the same result. But this is a very, very simple example. Let us take another common spot where the outcome might be probably not so obvious. This hand I played in a $215 Winter Series. This is a very common spot where 20 big blind, a bit over 20 big blind stack in a PKO is jamming first in from a small blind. You are covering him very well, and the question is, what can you call? And additional information, the starting stack here was 50k in this tournament, and he had one starter bounty on his head, so he didn't win any bounties before. We are starting again with the changing odds method, and in this case, since we are still very early in the tournament, his bounties worth round about 17,000 chips. And in this case, we are getting then round about 1.76 to 1. And in this case, we are needing 36.2% equity of our combination against his range to call off the all-in. Let us first look at what the small blind can actually jam first in this spot. And you can see if he's taking in top range, then he can jam 40.2%. We are calling 46.1% in this case. If we are using the 36.2% equity and take his all-in jamming range of 40.2%, just put this in Aqualab, then we are getting a calling range which looks like this. Now, if we are looking on what HRC wants to call, it looks a bit different. It is not totally off, but you see that you will be a little bit to lose, especially in the offsuit king combinations, in the suited jacks, and in some of the bottomish suited hands which have no real high card value. But remember, this is a very quick approximation, so we add chips to the pot and get new equity out of this, because we know, okay, if it's 1.8 to 1, we need round about 36% equity. So this is a very quick calculation in game. Every time when you make a quick approximation, you're losing some degree of accuracy. And here the bounty power concept kicks in. So let us take the same example and now calculate the bounty power. So we are calculating here the equity drop, and we are risking 60% of a starting stack to win one bounty. So remember, 50k was the starting stack, and he's jamming 30k, so this is 60% of starting stack, and we can win one bounty. So we are getting a bounty power number of 1.7. As I said, how we are getting this number, we are discussing in point 3. Out of this 1.7 bounty power number, we know that, okay, there's an equity drop of 8.2%. We are comparing this to the odds which we are getting. And so you know that you need 38%, a little bit under 38%. This is then the resulting range which you get out of Aqualab if you say, okay, I want to have 38% against his 40% open jamming range. And this approximative solution looks already way better than the solution which we had before. So this is way more accurate. If you're looking at the very bottom combinations, yeah, now 10-6 suited is missing and Queen 3 suited is missing. But for the rest of the combinations, the approximation is actually pinpoint accurate. So you are increasing your degree of accuracy and you're decreasing your degree of uncertainty. And this is why I would always apply the bounty power concept. Yeah, it might take you some days to learn the concept, but you will benefit huge from this. Let me add a little information here. Don't forget, if you're doing the simulations, to take out top range in specific spots in your analysis. This is a very common mistake, and your calling ranges will change drastically if you are taking out top range. In this case, the small blind did jam a little bit over 20 big blinds. I personally don't expect players to jam 10s plus in this case. Probably not even ace king. Probably they do to be somehow balanced, a little bit balanced, right? But if I'm taking out top range, then all of a sudden I can add like 7 to 8% more range, then actually 9-5 suited becomes a very close call. If you compare this to the calculation where the top range was included, 9-5 suited is a clear fold. If you are excluding the top range of the small blind open jamming range, then 9-5 suited is a close call. So just a little side note, don't forget to take out the top range in specific spots. This is a very common mistake. If you struggle to use HRC correctly in PKO cases or in your PKO simulations, then please watch the video about the HRC usage in PKOs. There's a dedicated video in this course. Now let us shortly introduce the bounty power, since you're probably the most interested now on how it works. So the concept by itself is actually very simple. And what should it do? Well, it should simplify and generalize every non-ICM spot in a PKO. We want a degree of very high accuracy, so we want to have nearly a pinpoint calling range against an all-in, for example. And for this, we need a very good estimation of the equity which we need against an all-in jamming range. And additionally, we want to do this fast in-game. So how does it work? Well, now we're starting with the first equation already in the introduction, but don't shy away from this. If you're thinking about this probably once, twice, 10 times, then it will become very clear. It's actually not that hard. So the bounty power is defined by the number of starting bounties your opponent has divided by the number of starting stacks your opponent has. So for example, if he has one starting bounty and one starting stack, so at the very start of the tournament this would be the case, then his bounty power is 1. If the number of starting bounties he has is 3 and the number of starting stacks he has is 1, then the bounty power is 3. If he has one starting bounty and 2 starting stacks, then the bounty power is 0.5. So a very simple calculation in game. With a little bit of training, you probably need like 0.5 to 1 second to do this calculation. And how should you use this number? Well, you want to always know on how good the deal, I call it, actually is. So how much do I have to risk and what do I get for this risk? So if you have to risk several starting stacks to win just 1 or 2 start bounties, the deal is actually not very good, because the starting stacks also have a dollar value. With the chips, you're participating on the payouts in the tournament. And if the stack in a, let's say, $100 PKO is worth, let's say, $500, but you can only win $50 bounties, well, then the deal is actually not very good. So in this case, if he has 10 starting stacks, so his $500 stack value, but you can only win $50, so he has only 2 starting bounties, then the deal is not very good, and this means the influence of the bounty is not very big. So the equity drop compared to the odds which you are getting is not very big. When you are then starting doing the research and doing a lot of simulations and look at, okay, now for 20 big blind jam and 1 start bounty in different stages of the tournament, how big is the equity drop? For 30 big blind all-in situations with 1, 2, 3, 10 starting bounties which are involved, how big is the equity drop? You will actually notice that there is a very consistent outcome if you're using exactly this bounty power concept. So you will see, for example, if you're risking 1 start stack to win 1 start bounty, or you're risking 5 start stacks to win 5 start bounties, the equity drop will be in the same neighborhood, which is in this case for the bounty power 1, round about 5% equity drop. And this is true for nearly every stage of the tournament. So now you can start to generalize and say, okay, if I can win 2 bounties and have to risk 4 starting stacks, is this the same equity drop like if I'm winning 1 start bounty and have to risk 2 starting stacks? So this would be the bounty power of 0.5. We can take the next situation where I say, okay, I can win 4 start bounties, but I have to risk 8 starting stacks, and so on. And you're calculating all the equities, and then you see, oh, okay, this is always in the same neighborhood. So for this case, bounty power 0.5, you're always in the like 2.5% equity drop neighborhood. And then you're going on, and in the end, you have a very simple concept which gives you very stable equity drops for nearly every stage of the tournament. We did publish ranges in the range viewer for the bounty course, and the ranges are using the generalization of this concept. So if I say, for example, you're looking at rejamming ranges for the bounty power 1, then you can use those ranges for every stage of the tournament when the ratio of bounties to V1 to stack stacks which you have to risk is 1. Then you are looking at the rejamming ranges, for example, for 1.5 bounty power, and you can apply this to every stage of the tournament besides the final table, where the ratio is 1.5. So for example, you can win 3 starting bounties, but you have to risk 2 starting stacks. Let me add in the fourth point a little bit of mixed information, which also should be answering some of the questions which occur. And let me start with the final table play and 2 very quick informations on questions which I very often get. So first of all, yes, the final table play changes. Your ranges which you want to play at the PKO final table are different to the ranges which you want to play on a non-KO final table. But the influence of the bounty isn't as impactful on the outcoming ranges as you might think. So I very often hear this argumentation, if I win this bounty, this is already worth compared to the payout structure like 2 pay jumps. And this is not a good way of thinking on how bounties are working, especially not at the final table. Because on the final table, the stack sizes by themselves have a very big value. If you're playing big fields, then the stack dollar values of the stacks by themselves, not the bounty, are actually very big compared to the worth of one single bounty. This is because a lot of the bounty prize pool has been already distributed out before you even reach the final table. But most of the regular prize pool is actually distributed at the final table. So you have a very, let's say, skewed distribution of money on the final table. Not so much out of the bounties, but a lot out of the regular prize pool. And yes, and heads up, the bounties are actually very important because you can win your own bounty and the opponent's bounty. And the heads up is usually pretty big, but the influence before, after bounty, all the thinking, this is worth 1-2 pay jumps, this is not very good. Additionally, you have a stabilization effect for the regen ranges. I don't want to dive too deep into this. What I want to say right here is that on a KO final table, you usually don't have the problem that if your opponent is punting by calling off way too much range, that you are punting as well with your regen. This is what happens usually on a non-KO final table, but on a KO final table, since you are participating on the bounty prize pool as well and have some future EV, if you're winning the hand, you're covering a lot of players, you might be able to win more bounties, so you're participating more on like immediate dollar effects. Let's call it that way. There you have a stabilization effect, so you can play your regenerating ranges, for example, with way more confidence without having any informations about your opponent, so you don't care about if he is, for example, not regarding ICM and just punt calling off with a way to wide range. Also, little side note, the chip leader, and if the chip leader did fold, the second chip leader can do whatever they want on a final table. So they can increase their opening ranges, 3-betting ranges, 4-bet in-get ranges. They can do whatever they want on a final table. Very interesting effects. Again, I would refer here to final table video, non-KO versus PKO final table. What you should have now already taken away is that being very good at estimating equity of a combo against the range is crucial for getting a tremendous edge in bounties. So if you have calculated your equity and you can estimate your opponent's range, you're not done. You have to exactly know, or nearly exactly know, which combinations you can call if you have a given equity which you need against a certain range, which for example goes all in. And of course this does not only apply to PKO by itself, it also applies to cash game, it also applies to non-KO, MTT poker, sit and goes, whatever, it applies to poker. But probably in other formats, it's not costing you that much money to make like smaller mistakes. in bounties it can cost you a lot, or let's put it the other way, you are not playing your edge out in a way which you can, so you can make a lot of money. In the case that I'm facing a 10% open jamming range and I have king jack offsuit, I should just know if the top range is included, I have around about 35% equity against this range, and if I exclude the top range, then I have like 37.75% equity against the open jamming range. And if you're not there, and this is the case for a lot of poker players because the importance of this kind of knowledge is underestimated in other poker variants, I would say, then you should just work with Alcohol. And I know that probably sounds a little bit boring, just taking combinations, putting them against ranges, and then look how much equity the combination has. But if you're getting very, very good at this, believe me, you're making a lot of money in bounty tournaments. If you are very good at this kind of estimating equity against a certain range, then you will be, as I said, Superman in PKOs. When I do the equilib work, just a little side note here, I always do the equity of a combination against the full range and the equity of a combination against a range which doesn't contain top range, let's say queens plus. A little side note here, I do publish the ranges if I have done my research and I have found, for example, some effects. And then I just put them inside of the range viewer and I write something in Discord or probably write something in the paper, and then you can look at this and you can take out your own ideas or follow my logic on why I did this. Some of the ranges we publish are of course only guidelines because there are a lot of factors which are influencing the range, size of the stacks, the bounties. Is ICM there? Yes, no. Do I have future EV effects on the table? So for example, if I'm losing the hand, I'm not covering anyone on the table. If I'm winning the hand, I'm covering everyone on the table. Am I at the money bubble? So there are of course a lot of variables which are influencing the range. So don't take every range for the perfect solutions. They are guidelines. They should give you an idea on how wide or how tight you should be, how good an open race is compared to an open jam, so you should get the effect. And if you want to follow this effect, you should do your own research. Work with the simulation tool, work with our online calculation tool, take spots, ask questions. And this leads me to the fifth point on how I personally would go through the content when I just would start now with the course. So the first point is, if you're unfamiliar with the very basic concepts of MTT poker, then you should always start with the conceptual knowledge as a basement for all discussions which will come afterwards. So if you're unfamiliar with the ICM concept, with bubble factors, with equity realization, with equity drops, with risk premiums, on how different finite tables have different influences on your ranges, if you have never recalculated a bounty value in chips, for example, if you have never deducted equity from the equity which are given by the odds, just start with the conceptual knowledge. There's everything explained inside of the theory videos. If you don't have the time or you find it very hard to understand the math inside of the theory videos, keep in mind the math by itself is not very important. Just for you to get the logic on how a bounty influences your ranges is in the end important. And the way how to get there is for every person different. So if you have problems with the math, just let the math be math and take away the effects which the math in the end has on your ranges. When you have the conceptual knowledge already, or you have done the conceptual work, then you have to start getting a good study routine. You can use HRC, you can use our online tool. We have included some examples, or a lot of examples, in our practice videos on how to use HRC, how to solve a certain spot, and you should be able to do this by yourself so that you can study after a session your marked hands where you did wonder, was this a close spot? Is this a good call? Is this a bad fold? And so on. When you're done with your study routine, you can start learning your preferred approximation, I would call it. So as you have seen, there are a lot of different concepts on how to deal with the bounty in-game. I personally, as I said, use the bounty power concept and the resulting equity drops of the bounty power concept because it's very easy for me to just subtract the equity given by the bounty power from the equity I'm getting by the pot odds, and then I easily can translate the equity which I need in combinations which I can call against a certain, let's say, all-in range. If you want to take a different approximation, so not the bounty power concept, that's totally okay. There are some variables which will influence the decision which approximation you want to use. So for example, your multi-tabling game, how many tables you play, how fast you can calculate like 2 or 4 numbers in your head. So take the approximation which you feel the most comfortable with and just stick with this for the start. The first 3 points are giving you the basement. So you have the conceptual stuff, you have your study routine, and you have a good approximation which you can use right away to just play better PKOs right now. You can follow this up then with digging deeper in the published ranges, where I show, for example, how PKO and KO ranges are deviating. You can go inside of the discussed exploits, for example, race against jam, or which combinations you will open jam in a KO compared to a non-KO when you're very short. You can go inside of the discussed leaks, which we discuss in the practice videos by using HRC or the online tool, and recalculate the ranges, take different spots, look how the ranges are changing, and so on. So the work is not done when you have the conceptual knowledge and you have a good approximations and you have your study routine for spots which occur in game. Of course, take what we have already researched, like the ranges, like the exploits, and think about this, follow the logic, and take as much as you can out of this. This is a lot of stuff, and so the 5th point is actually very important to me. Take your time. Don't rush it. Think about what I did say at the very start. How would you think about the whole content if I would introduce ICM today? This would be also a lot of work, and you would have to put a lot of time into all of the calculations on the range changes, how you want to change your game when ICM effects are kicking in, and this will take time. And if you don't take the time, then you probably learn wrong things. You learn wrong approximations, or your execution in game is just off. So take your time, mark hands, simulate the hands after the session. Think about spots where you always struggle, where you're always unsure on what you should call, what you should 3-bet, what you should flat, etc. Just give it time. And the 6th point, since I am very open for discussion and looking over your spots which you marked and where you already have worked out a solution but you're unsure if, for example, you did use the tool correct, or for example, if you did take population tendencies correctly into account. And for all those kind of questions, of course, also for the theory, so for the modeling, for the PKO approximations, every single math logical thing which is inside of the course, please ask me in Discord. We have a Discord channel for the bounty course where the bounty beast owners are inside. Join Discord and ask your questions. That's it for today. I hope you find the course very satisfying and that it will increase your edge in PKOs in a tremendous way. See you on Discord, see you at the tables. Good luck guys, and bye bye.